I can't tell if this is how the weapons are meant to be held. They don't want to stay held like this. Hello, this is Ken. I like making things. I like making things out of paper, and I like making things cooler. Especially my figures. Sometimes figures don't look all that screen accurate. All they need is a bit of touch up here and there to unleash their hidden potential. I also love using everyday tools and materials to recreate iconic scenes for my figures, so they can shine on my display. Subscribe to my channel and join my DIY adventure as I ask myself the same question every week. Can I make it? Last week, I worked on Mr. Knight, giving him a bit more contrast, and most importantly, making his eyes glow. It turned out pretty cool. Check it out. Now I can't do Mr. Knight but not Moonknight. These two are meant to be a pair. Just like the Thor Love and Thunder wave, I appreciate figures with asymmetrical capes. They'd add a bit of movement to the figures and make them appear slightly more dynamic, especially when it comes to posing. This is a really cool figure. The design looks awesome, and he looks pretty screen accurate, except for one little thing. Let's deconstruct this figure. There's an FAQ on the paint and brushes I use in the description box below. The one thing that sticks out the most is the lack of contrast. It's not as bad as Mr. Knight, but a black wash would bring out all the details of the bandages. Hasbro did give him screen accurate colors. I just don't want Moonknight to look too dark next to Mr. Knight or vice versa. Another thing that I noticed is that the cloak is a slightly different shade of grey and looks plasticky. I want the texture and the color to match the rest of the outfit a bit more. The most glaring issue is that for some reason, the face is missing that one strip of bandage across his nose and cheeks. I assumed this was the original design, but the show decided to tweak the design of the face late in the process. This should be a relatively easy fix, but I'm mostly going to be using black or something similar. So, can I make it? I'm very comfortable and confident when it comes to colors, except for the color black. I try to avoid using pure black unless the area I'm painting is supposed to be black. The reason is because black is a very harsh color, and it's not easy to remove or lighten up. Once it's on the plastic, it just stays on. So to keep it safe, I'm gonna mix a bit of white to get a dark gray color and use that instead. That way, I can build up the color or fix my mistakes more effectively. I always like testing the paint on an area that's hidden first, to get the feel of how the paint reacts on the plastic, and to see if I'm using the right shade of color. That looks pretty good. The color isn't too harsh, and looks natural. Alright, let's do this. With the black wash, I'm going to focus and emphasize certain areas a bit more than others. For example, Moonknight has this chest plate that kinda sticks out a bit. I want to keep that piece lighter than the rest. Our eyes perceive lighter colors to be closer, so by focusing on the wash on the areas around the chest plate, it'll make it pop more. The thing with the wash, at least with the paint that I'm using, is that the color becomes lighter or less intense once it's dried. So I have to predict what it will look like in a couple of minutes and make sure I'm not over or underdoing it. The other thing about a wash is that it's hard to predict where the paint will stick to. Generally, it likes sticking to grooves and edges and tends to slide off smooth surfaces. Luckily, Moonknight is pretty textured, so that makes it pretty easy to do. I just have to make sure the paint doesn't get stuck in one spot and end up with a dark patch. Oh, another tip I learned from you and have been doing to all my figures since is that I prep my figures by washing them with warm soapy water using a toothbrush. I do think it helps with the paint gripping onto the plastic, but certain type of plastic is still too smooth and slippery, like the fabric pieces here on the waist. I just have to make sure I apply an even thin coat over them first, and once that first layer has dried, the next few layers will grip on much better. Alternatively, I can sand the surface too to roughen up the surface. Okay, the body's looking good so far. The limbs look so plain now. Let me work on the arms next. I'm going to use the chest as a reference. Everything around the chest should be at least half a shade darker. There's this diamond checkered pattern on his forearms. Let me see if this works. I'm hoping the paint will stick to the edges of the diamonds. It's kinda working, but it also looks a bit muddy. The arm kinda has the same shade of grey all over it. So I'm gonna use a finer brush to emphasize the diamonds a bit more. I could have done this with the entire figure, but I don't have that patience. I'm gonna make the diamonds a bit darker than the rest of the arm. That will make the lines on the forearm pop more, and make the gauntlets stand out against the bandages. Ah, that looks much better. So much more defined. Now, a quick wash on the hands to complete the arms, and all there's left are the legs. I'm starting to notice how dark the figure is becoming. It's so gradual that I didn't notice it earlier. But it's too late now. Gotta roll with it. Gotta make the legs match the rest of the figure. I can apply a bit of white to lighten up the figure, but there's a risk of the color turning really muddy. I'm not risking that. We'll see how this goes. Alright, some final touches on the body. I like the gold paint they used, but I'm going to make them a bit more metallic to exaggerate the contrast between the shiny metals and the matte bandages. Here's the head. Oh wow, it looks so pale. Did I ruin the body? Or is it because my eyes got used to the darker paint? Before I start painting, let me add the strip of bandage first. I'm gonna use a thin strip of masking tape for that. Oh, that's still too thick. There. Now let me stick this on. This is like performing a surgery. So much precision required. Let me see if I can manipulate the position of the tape with my tweezer. The piece is shaped like an upside down V. It angles downwards. Let's hope it's symmetrical. Good enough. Okay, let's paint. Now because of the different materials, I'm a bit worried that the tape may absorb more paint than the plastic and become really dark. So I'm going to apply the wash very gradually so I can monitor how the paint is reacting to the tape. Now oops, uh-oh, please don't stay dark. Let me try and wipe the paint away. Please work, please work, please work. Okay, I saved it. Now let me add that glow effect to the eyes. I went a bit overboard with Mr. Knight, so I'm not gonna make this as dark or intense this time. Just need to dab the eyes with a wet brush. Oh, imagine if it turns out like this. Okay, that's better. The thing I learned from my Mr. Knight custom is that making the center of the eyes pure white will help enhance that glow effect. So let's see. Oh great. Now the eyes are uneven. No. Okay, be right back. I think this is the best I can do. I'm not touching the eyes anymore. Onto the hood. I don't like how smooth it looks. It has this slippery, rubbery feel to it. So I'm going to dab a similar shade of grey all over it to add a bit of texture so it looks a bit more like a piece of fabric. I'm then dabbing a lighter color as my highlight to brighten up the hood a bit. And a bit of shading to give it more dimension. And last but not least, let's give the crescent a bit more of a shadow to make it pop more. This is a bit tricky. I don't want too harsh of a shadow. I want it to be subtle. Alright, here's the finished head. Uh-oh, it got so much darker. I was too focused on the details and I forgot about the overall tone. Let me fix it by dabbing the lighter color all over the hood again. Alright, there we go. It's still a bit darker than I hoped, especially next to the unpainted one, but it looks so much more detailed. It should look fine once it's put back onto the body. But before I do that, let me quickly work on the cape. Unlike the hood, the cape here has molded texture. Great. So all I really need to do is to exaggerate the highlights and shadows. Let me start by going over the entire thing with the same shade of grey I used on the hood, so they match. Next, I'm applying a darker shade of grey into the indentations to exaggerate the contrast. Okay, I think I went overboard with the shading here too. I need to add a bit of highlights back. I'll do it off screen. As for his weapons, I'm gonna keep the paint thin, since his hands will be directly grabbing onto these crescent-shaped weapons. It's very likely that the paint will get scraped, but I do want them to look a bit more metallic, and I want to bring out the little details too. Here's the finished figure. Oh wow, I love how it turned out. There's so much more depth to the figure. Oh, I think I overdid the back of the cloak. It looks very dark in comparison. That's what happens when I am too focused on a certain element and forget to look at the bigger picture. By ignoring the back of the cape, I think it looks very good. I captured that dusty mummy look quite well. The face and the chest piece turned out great. What do you think? Do you like what I've done? Let me know down below. The back of the cloak doesn't bother me too much, since I rarely display my figures facing away from me anyway. There's just something about the design of this figure that looks so cool. I think it's the lack of obvious joints. The neck, shoulders, abs, hips, knees and ankle joints are pretty well concealed. The only obvious joints are his elbow joints. I also think they did a pretty good job with the cape too. The way it flows makes it look like as if Moonknight is in motion, or there's wind blowing in the background. Alright, let's end this with a photo shoot. Another thing that I'm really happy with are his eyes. I think I did an even better job with the glowing eyes this time with Moonknight. They are less intense, but are more natural looking. The only thing I don't love are his stiff joints, which is naturally a good thing, but I feel like I'm about to snap his arms off every time I move them. But I'm still able to do a variety of poses. This is a figure with no bad sides. Every shot looks like it could be on a poster, especially when holding his weapons. Unlike traditional weapons like a sword or a gun, there are so many ways to hold these ones here, and there doesn't seem to be a wrong way to hold them. They can be held with both hands, or they can be combined into one singular weapon too. I tried doing some action poses. The flowing cape is doing all the heavy lifting here. Moonknight looks like he's flying through the sky. Alright, let's bring Mr. Knight into the mix. Moonknight is so much darker and grayer. It did bother me at first before I painted them, but now I'm not so sure. They look great individually, but it is a little odd to see such a huge difference in color. Part of me wants to lighten up Moonknight a bit, but I'm worried about messing up the work I did here. Maybe it's fine. At least now they're two distinctively different characters. Alright, give it a like if you enjoyed today's video. I still want to make a display for these Moonknight characters, and by the time you're watching this, I should already be working on it. So subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this. And as always, stay inspired, and I'll see you next week. I can make it, so can you.